Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Welcome again to our Trauma Healing Institute webinar. My name is Marlena Centeno, and I'll be your host during this time. If you're joining us today, you are one of 14,000 facilitators from all around the world who are doing the ministry of bringing healing to wounded hearts. I know that you're joining from all over the world, and I see many of you are saying hello in the chat feature. So continue to do so. If you're just joining us, we would love to say hi to you and find out where you're calling in from. And before I say anything else, I want to specifically just say thank you. Thank you for taking on this ministry. I see Rachel from Minnesota. Thank you for being a trauma healing facilitator. I see those of you calling in from South Sudan, from South Africa, Sri Lanka, New Zealand, Michael and Catherine from Africa, thank you. We just want to say thank you. From Lawrence in Singapore, thank you for doing the work of this ministry. We're with you, you're not alone. We're in unprecedented times. While we are all encouraged to shelter at home during this pandemic, frontline workers like medical professionals, first responders, counselors, church leaders, and even you are being asked to care for the needs in your community. As a trauma healing facilitator, and those of you in these professions, you might be beginning to suffer from burnout, anxiety, and secondary trauma. This webinar will explore the unique challenges faced by frontline medical and ministry leaders and consider specific practical ways you, as a trauma healing facilitator, can support the resilience of yourself and of others. As always, we're going to allow you to share your thoughts with all of the participants using the chat feature and ask the panelists questions. And don't worry, this session will be recorded and a link to the recording will be made available after the presentation. So allow me to introduce Dr. Phil Monroe. He is the trauma healing team leader for American Bible Society, and he'll be interviewing Stacy Connard. Stacy is a staff care chaplain for Samaritan's Purse. Stacy is currently on assignment in New York, working as a chaplain with COVID-19 patients. Phil, I'm gonna transition over to you.
Thank you, Marlena. It's so good to be here with all of you around the world. And thank you, Stacy, for taking time out of the work that you're doing there in Manhattan and with Samaritan's Purse. So welcome.
Thank you.
I think it might be great to start with just a little bit of an introduction. What does a crisis response chaplain do? Tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing right now.
So the role I'm in right now is staff care chaplain. So my focus is really the medical staff that we have down here in Manhattan. And part of that, sometimes in supporting the staff, it also means that I might be supporting a patient or family members of the patient if the staff needs that. So that happens, but my primary role is really focusing on our staff, our medical personnel.
Excellent. So that's a lot of different types of needs coming at you, both what the medical staff need, but also, of course, the families and the patients are all feeling things at the same time. So that's a big burden. We will be praying for you, and we will ask our audience to be praying for you as well. So let's get right into our interview. I'd love to start with the question, what are some of the surprising challenges that frontline medical workers are facing? There's a lot that we might be aware of, like some fears that they have of themselves contracting the virus or bringing it home to their families. But beyond that, what are some of the surprising and maybe hidden challenges that they're facing?
Yeah. Well, you know, this just by nature of the nature of this virus, it's creating a lot of difficult scenarios, a lot of difficult decisions that have to be made by family members and then also by medical personnel. And so that, I don't know that that's surprising about it, but the more we get into it, I think the more of that we see how difficult it is. Also, I think what's one of the things that's been eye-opening to me coming down here is to be able to talk to our medical folks and hear people's response to all of the accolades that our medical and first responders are getting. And they are appreciated. People do appreciate our medical personnel and first responders. And here in New York, when the staff changes, people are outside clapping and ringing bells and all these things. And we've been welcomed here and given, lots of appreciation. But I will have to say it's hard for the medical people to receive that because they feel so conflicted internally because their job is so tough and there's a lot of patients they can't save. And so they have a hard time receiving that praise from.
That is surprising. And let's talk a little bit more about that. Why, one of the reasons why it seems to be tough is there seems to be a lot of moral dilemmas that they face. So can you talk to us a little bit about that challenge that's surprising maybe?
Yeah. Well, for one, with this disease, you might have a patient who they're doing well 1 minute, and you think they're going to be fine, and then the next minute they don't do fine, and all the things that you as a medical person are trained to do are not working on all the normal things. And so you wonder, I think people begin to question, is it me? Is it my training? Is it something inadequate in me that I can't help people? There just begins this inner dialogue. And over time, it wears on them very much. I don't know if you saw it recently in the news. There's a doctor here in Manhattan who she committed suicide. And really, it was just the burden and the guilt she felt because she could not save the patients that she so wanted to save. And she couldn't live with that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's powerful. In a previous conversation you and I were having, you were talking about how even the approach to medicine is really changed in this, which instead of being very patient-centered, it is now has a different center.
Yeah, I mean, in times of crisis, especially nationwide, community-wide crisis, our focus in medicine changes. Normally, especially in Western medicine, we focus a lot more on the autonomy of the patient and the patient needs. But when a crisis like this happens, the focus shifts more to the health of the well-being of your medical workers, because you've got to protect them, and then also protecting the community. So right now, the things we have in place, like for instance, the DNR, do not resuscitate orders. That's been tough because in many places, many hospitals, there has just been a policy that you do not resuscitate patients, because when you do that, you expose your medical workers. They're even at a higher risk of contracting the disease when they're trying to resuscitate someone. The same is true for the paramedics. And I know the paramedics in New York have had a really hard time with this kind of thing. And so that creates a lot of internal pain for medical workers who are trained to do everything they can to save a life. And so those are the type of decisions and the policies that are made and decisions that are made right now that are tough.
Yeah. Yeah, when you start thinking about what you're talking about, not even those who are working necessarily in the hospital like you're working in Samaritan's Purse that's popped up there in New York City, but any medical worker who has to make these decisions about what I would normally do and now what I have to do in order to protect myself or the community, that really flips the sense of who I am and what I do.
You're not having family members nearby, and not having that contact with people, it's a big deal. It's hard.
Yeah.
It goes against the way that even the things like wearing the mask, you can't see someone's face, you can't see a smile. And that's so difficult for the patients, the families, and the medical workers.
So maybe we can flip to, we're not going to solve this problem really quickly, but what are some ways then that we might be able to support and encourage frontline medical workers? We're hearing that maybe even some of the accolades maybe doesn't provide exactly what we would hope it would provide.
Yeah.
So what do they need and what can we do as their supporters?
Well, I think as we remind them that we're behind them, that is important to them, and just creating, even within our medical communities, creating that sense of solidarity and support. We're all in this together, and you're supported. You're not making that decision, alone. A lot of times too, if policies can be communicated ahead of time and very clearly, it takes some weight off of the individual medical worker. So those are important. I think, we don't want to stop people from showing their gratitude and being thankful, but it's important to keep in mind that this is a soul wounding disease. I mean, it's so painful for our medical folks, and even to try to reassure them and say, well, it's not your fault, you're doing a great job, we love you, that it's not reassuring. And so sometimes the best thing we can do is just to honestly say to our friends who are first responders, you are in an impossible situation. And, we are behind you, we're with you, but we realize that this is tough. And just to acknowledge it and name it, talk to them about moral injury. It helps when people know that it is a real wound and it needs care and attention. So
I think that's really important. Acknowledge the impossible situation rather than try to allay the fear or the guilt or as the first step.
right, that just feels dismissive. So
Yeah. Well, thank you, Stacy, so much for being able to give us a report directly from the front line. And we thank you for your work. We know you are carrying a burden now, not only your own and your families, but now the folks around you. And I understand that even today there's a lot going on there. And so you may have to cut off from us and our webinar. But Marlene, are there any questions or something that someone would like to ask?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation about the connection between listening to combat vets saying the same type of thing, the moral injury. So maybe if you want to, if you can just share briefly about that connection and what moral injury is really, what that really is.
yeah, moral injury is when you feel that your own deeply held beliefs about what is right and good and should happen are transgressed in some way. And either you've been part of the transgression or you've witnessed it. It could be the organization you're a part of, or certain policies have created that situation. And I always look at moral injury kind of on a spectrum. So you could be bruised morally and you could be deeply wounded morally. But the common things that you see with moral injury is that shame, the guilt that often leads people to isolate and withdraw from others. So we want to be real sensitive to that. I think in the military community, moral injury has been researched a lot in the last few years, and we're seeing that moral injury is probably a factor, a very strong factor in the high rate of military suicides. So I think we need to watch out for this in the coming months. With our medical and first responder people. We're already seeing in New York, like I said, the doctor, and actually 2 days before her, a well-known paramedic here in the Bronx committed suicide. We need to be aware of this.
Yeah. So someone also asked, it's helpful for medical workers to have debriefs, or is it helpful for medical workers to have debriefs, or are they so overwhelmed with trying to get through the crisis that they just want to wait until this is over? Kind of, what do you think? Should we be providing space for them to share and debrief, or should we maybe wait until this is over?
Well, I mean, in some ways it depends on the person. Some people, it's helpful for them to at least have a safe place to just talk, especially if there's been a hard case, a difficult thing. They might immediately need just to talk to someone. Not any kind of formal or mandated debrief. I wouldn't do that kind of thing, but I would create a space. But I do think that many of our medical people are, in order just to keep going, they're going to have to put this on a shelf for right now and come back and visit it. We just want to keep the door open and continue to make the opportunities. And I am really thankful for the organization I'm working with right now, because they have gone above and beyond in making these opportunities, not just providing staff care, which is super on the ground, but even as they get home, there's a plan to care for their folks. And that's very well thought out. So I'm encouraged by that. And I think it definitely needs to happen and be put in place.
So it sounds like maybe preparing for a debrief or maybe a healing group, but for now, the immediate, just keeping the door open and acknowledging that this is incredibly hard. Yeah. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think you're really talking about creating safe spaces where people know that they can come. And if you have a connection and a relationship with them, then maybe at a later time, they'll be ready to open up. So good. All right, thank you, Stacy, so much for your time. We pray a blessing over you in your work and for your family and the lives that you're touching. We know that you will not be unaffected by this, and so we continue to pray over you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Yeah, well, Phil, thank you so much for thinking of Stacy and calling her into this space so that we can learn specifically how to pray for medical professionals, but also for the chaplains who are caring for the medical professionals, the facilitators who are caring for the medical professional. It's going to affect all of us. And I think something that she said that was key, where our program really comes into play, is creating that space for debrief or a healing group kind of once this begins to die down. So thank you for that. Yeah. So we have two other guests with us that we'll be interviewing. We have Pearl Little. She is from Edinburgh, Scotland, or she is in Edinburgh, Scotland. She's the Trauma Healing Program Manager for the Bible Society of Scotland. Welcome, Pearl. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah. And we also have Geneba Bakiono. She's joining us from Burkina Faso in Africa. Geneba is the Trauma Healing Regional Coordinator for West Africa. And she's also a master facilitator in classic, children, and story-based trauma healing. I think Geneba is also on her way to teens as well. So Geneba, welcome. Thank you so much for your wisdom in our program.
Thank you, Marlena.
Phil, why don't you go ahead and transition us to hearing from our guests?
Yes, so thank you, Pearl and Geneba, for coming on to this webinar as well. You know, we've just been hearing from Stacy about some of the hidden, surprising challenges and burdens that frontline medical workers are experiencing around the world. And so that might be more something that's in our awareness, but we know that ministry workers and ministry leaders around the world are also on a front line as well. And so I would like to ask you the same questions. And Pearl, I'll start with you. Maybe you could tell us some of the surprising challenges and burdens that ministry leaders and church leaders are facing in Scotland.
Surely. It's interesting because as I was thinking about this, 6 weeks ago on Sunday, we were all in church as normal and we worshiped together. And then the next Sunday, our church buildings were all closed. And so our church leaders in that frantic week in between had to find ways to contact and be in touch with their congregations. And for them, that has been really tricky. That's been hard. The sermon that they would normally preach on a Sunday, they have to prepare and speak to a camera on a Wednesday so that it can be uploaded and put on for the Sunday. So they have no congregation there in front of them. They have to learn to do their prayer meetings, their Bible studies, their leaders meetings, all suddenly online. The internet goes down, they get so far in and things are not working, and it's very, very stressful. And the church leaders I've spoken to have particularly found this much more stressful than normal, obviously. And some of them have said to me that, in fact, they're busier than they ever were, trying to get all of this stuff up so that people can enjoy it. And probably some of them that I've spoken to have said that in these few weeks since this pandemic started, exhaustion is already setting in with them. They're very, very tired. And there are things that they have to cope with normally that are difficult, but during this time are extra difficult. And one of the things that ministers have spoken to me about particularly is taking funeral services. They have found this extremely difficult. Normally, before they would take a funeral service, they would go to the family, to the home, they would sit with the family, they would pray with them, they would talk with them, and they would hear stories of the loved one that had gone. But that has to be done by phone now. They're not allowed to go into the home. And then when the actual service happens, it's very, very short. I saw a statistic online today. One of our undertakers here in Edinburgh alone, who would normally do 6 funerals in the one day, are doing 17 funerals each day. And so you can imagine the services have to be so much smaller. And so people are maybe 10-minute services, very short. And then our church leaders who are taking these services can't even shake hands with the family. So there's that connection is gone. So they find that difficult.
Yeah. The very identity of the work that we do as pastoring and caregiving is now utterly changed. And so you would imagine how it would not only be exhausting, but create a lot of questions and distress. Ganeba, the same question to you. In Ouagadougou, there in Burkina Faso, what are you seeing as some of these challenges as well for ministry leaders?
Thank you very much, Phil, for the question. And I'm really happy to answer not only behalf of Burkina, but Africa, because I'm the regional coordinator. We know that this pandemic has caused uncertainties and fear in people's life of what tomorrow holds, because a lot is at stake and many people are living on their daily wages. Keeping them indoor now have made them starve. Many people also have lost their loved ones. Some have been infected by the virus, and some are requested to leave the house where they are because they could not pay the 1 month rent. And some are experiencing loneliness and are depressed. So many of church leaders are experiencing various feelings and they are overwhelmed by those feelings. And they expect their leaders to share their distress and pray for them. The church leaders end up being overwhelmed to handle so many cases, various cases for which they are not prepared for. So it is a real challenge to them. And Pearl spoke about the funerals. Many church leaders feel guilty to not do enough to support families who are going through grieving process, because before the pandemic, there is a long process of grieving. You support the families. Some people would go stay with them for days. Some other would cook for them. And they give even opportunity to people to say what good the person has done when she was living. That can no longer happen because you are given just 1 hour to carry the body and bury it. So this is also creating guilt in church leaders' heart because they feel that we should have done more than that to support the family, but we are not able to.
So when we think about this, what you're saying, Ganeba, is, you know, the church leader themselves are going through this and they're trying to deal with their own potential of starvation and their housing and depression, but then they're supposed to be still caring for their congregants and managing things like funerals and everything else that they're supposed to do without the capacity.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm hearing lots of comments in the chats as well that a lot of people are experiencing this, that when we don't grieve in our traditional ways, it extends the grieving process and it makes it much harder. That, yeah, a lot of confirmation about that all over the world right now.
Exactly.
Yes. So here's one of these things that I'm seeing that's similar to even our frontline medical workers. There was a way I was trained to serve. Now that has been flipped on its head, and I am making the best that I can, but it has its own impact because the ways that I knew I was doing the work that God was calling to me are no longer in front of me to give me that sort of feedback. And then I start to doubt and have questions about what I am doing. Am I doing it right? Am I doing enough? Is this what I'm hearing from you as well, both? Yes, Pearl? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because I listened to a podcast from a minister up in one of the small rural churches, and he was saying that his church was great. They were really getting involved in the community just now, doing lots of outreach, and it was wonderful. But he suddenly realized that he was focusing so much on that, and he was living in the same family, in his house with his family, but he was totally neglecting them, because he was so engrossed in trying to get as much out there as possible. And he had to take a step back and think, actually, wait, I have young children in this family. I've got a wife, and she needs some of my time too. And so he's had to really make himself take time to sit down and have a coffee with his wife, or to play with his children, or help them with their homework, because he felt such a pressure to be doing as much as he possibly could. So yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, wow. And I imagine, Ganeba, you're hearing some of those same things in your context as well.
Yes. One thing that is also a great challenge to church leaders is that they add a way to do the service. Now that this is no longer possible, they wonder how can they still take care of the people and have them still connected to God. Many feel that the members have weakened in their faith. They are not sure if they are still reading the Bible, if they are still praying. And to respond to that, some church leaders still try to connect with the small group, because the church is now trying to facilitate home worship or small group worship. So those who are not even able to post the sermon anywhere, they try to join the small groups and have that teaching. Imagine if you have like 20 small groups, you have to pass through all those groups. It is really overwhelming. If you are not able to reach all of them, then you feel guilty that you minister to some of them and you didn't minister to the others.
So you're saying that some people are actually needing to preach their sermons or teach their classes 20 different times.
Exactly.
Whoa, yeah. Okay, wow, that's a burden I hadn't been thinking about. Maybe we can switch now to start thinking about how can we support our church leaders as frontline workers as well. Pearl, maybe you can tell me a little bit, what are a couple of things that might be beneficial to church leaders at this time?
Surely, on the Scottish Bible Society website, we have the Beyond Disaster booklet, which is available for download. And we have several hundred downloads already in these last 2 weeks. And having spoken to facilitators, they are saying that their church leaders have found this extremely helpful. Some of the material they're actually using in their sermons. Others are using it just in the way that they're talking with people, and it's been really helpful for them. The other thing that we've done with Scottish Bible Society is over the last 2 weeks, we have run about 35 facilitators through the COVID-19 material, and they now have gone back into their own communities and churches and are sharing this with other people, taking groups online and sharing with them. The interesting thing, I've spoken to a couple of facilitators today, and they were saying that after they do the COVID-19 material, they then ask the group, would they like to do a lament? And they then do the lament session with them. And so people are being allowed to express their feelings to God by writing their lament and then sharing it with each other. And I think this is one way that we can help our church leaders by taking some of the pastoral pressure off them by doing some things like that. Something else that's so simple, and we all can do it, is actually in the midst of all of the emails and phone calls that our church leaders are getting, if they get one from us that says, thank you, you're doing a good job, and I'm praying for you. And that's a simple thing, but it's really powerful. I know my husband, when he's sending a devotional down by email to the church, and when people respond and say thank you, it gives him a real boost too. And I think it's a really simple thing, but it's such an encouragement to our leaders.
Yeah, we can all say thank you. Yeah, Geneba.
Yes.
What are you seeing as ways that we can support our ministry leaders?
Thank you. As she said, THI has sent out already materials for the purpose of this hard time, the COVID-19 lesson and the Beyond Disaster lesson. What helped in Africa very much, even beyond Africa, was that the material was spread widely. We sent them everywhere. The Bible societies posted the material on their website. All the facilitators who have been trained, they received copies of them. The amazing result of that, testimonies are coming in now, is that even in countries where we have only one person we trained, we sent, and she shared the materials, and the material went to so many people. Somebody sent a report. I am just choosing one testimony among the many. He said that he received this material through a facilitator. He studied it with his family. During 6 days, the COVID lesson only, 1 hour every day. It did so good to them. He decided that he will do it with 33 pastors, and he did. He said that over the 33, 20 stayed until the end. And they carried the lesson to the radio station so that more people could benefit. So availing the material to people is a big step to do. And then in addition to that, as facilitator, we need to let them know that we are available to help, to answer their question, to coach them so that they can interact properly with the materials and get more information if necessary. For example, we see through the challenges they have that they are overwhelmed. They need to heal themselves. And then they need to take care of others. So we may need some stuff from even the classic, like the listening skills to help them with, in addition to the material we sent out that will help them explore their own feelings, accept the feeling as normal, and learn the ways to heal from them.
Something I heard from the audience was an idea about, like, our program is, the gold in it is that we don't have to be the only ones to do the program. We train others to train others to train others, and it trickles down from there. And Vicky in the chat mentioned that it might be a good idea, if you're a pastor on the line or you know of a pastor, to encourage the same type of model, where Geneba, you mentioned the one pastor going around to 20 different small groups, perhaps him training a group, you know, of 5 or however, so that they can go be released to you know, minister to the needs of the people. And so, especially for those that are in internet compromised societies, then that kind of, you know, one person can't do it all. You've got to begin to do the, you know, the Acts model of church multiplication and training one to train others to train others. So that was a great suggestion. Thank you, Vicky, for that.
I think there's a Bible passage about that, not just in Acts. The story of Moses, who was trying to do everything correct, right, and he needed his father-in-law to remind him, spread out the work. And so that's one nice thing that you both are reminding us. There are resources and facilitators who can help carry the load. Yeah. Marlena, are there any other questions that are coming in that you want to highlight?
Yeah, a lot of conversation about radio. People were surprised to hear about that, Geneba. It's not something that I think we're used to in America, but a lot of conversation about radio. Never thought about that. What a brilliant idea. Yeah, could you maybe share just briefly about what that's like in your region?
Yes, thank you very much, Marlena, for that question. Exactly, when we sent the material to the Bible societies, in Chad, for example, we noticed that many people cannot have access to internet and even get the material through the WhatsApp or whatever online means they use. So for them to reach the maximum of people, the idea of radio came in. In the beginning, they used to lead the lesson on the radio station. And then people in the region said that we hear that you have a good lesson going on the radio. We are far and we can't benefit here. What can you do for us? And we decided that then let us record the lessons and have the recording available to other radio stations. And that have been done. Right now, 25 radio stations are airing the COVID-19 lesson in Chad, including the national radio station. If there is a possibility, because some people have that possibility and the easiness, so they can use that opportunity to reach many people.
And that is the way of multiplying. You don't have to go from house to house, but it's one person or however many people spreading to so many people. What a wonderful idea. A lot of conversation, Geneba, about the use of radio, and never thought about it, but also people in the African context who are really excited that you mentioned that. So thank you. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Geneba was talking there, I'm thinking, we don't use radio, but in a much smaller scale, some of our facilitators are taking the COVID-19 material to hospital chaplains. So a little bit of what Stacey was talking about, giving them the opportunity to experience the COVID-19 material and then to use it where they are. And that's been really encouraging.
That's great.
Yeah, I would encourage all the facilitators to not sit with the materials. It is a riches in their hands to just look at people out there that are in need of this material and minister to them. That is one thing. And then themselves, remember to take care of ourselves as facilitators if we want to go far and we know how. Thank you very much.
Yeah. You know, as I'm thinking about what all three of you have said, including Stacey in the beginning, I'm wondering just what, besides Pearl, you were talking about the lament, what are some ways that we can commemorate together and share with our grievings together, you know, what's happening at this point in time. You know, there is a place where we're all in this narrative at the same time. We're all in the same story. So are you seeing things happening where people are able to commemorate the losses, commemorate the challenges, maybe even commemorate the ways that we've adapted?
Yeah, I think that in my thinking about my own church situation, and we're a small church, just 120 of us, so we all know each other really well. And I think this situation has drawn us surprisingly closer together, because we're not got the contact. Our contact is like this online, but I think we're having opportunities there to share maybe much more honestly with each other how we're feeling, and how we're reacting to this. And so I know that on our online prayer times, people are taking the time to say, actually today I'm struggling, and just being honest about where they are. And so, and then we all take the time to pray for that person. And so I think the opportunities for us to be honest and open with each other and share with each other have actually grown, which is wonderful.
That's really helpful, Pearl. And maybe we'll use that as our transition here to commemorating together and being honest together about the challenges to all of us. So I want to thank you, Pearl, for being willing to bring Edinburgh to us. And I want to thank you, Geneba, for bringing Ouagadougou to us. And yes, the regions that you represent. Remembering that while we might recognize that medical workers are in the front line, really in the trenches, but so are our ministry leaders as well, and knowing how to pray for and encourage them all. So thank you so much for your time. And I wanted to do a little transition here, Marlena, to thinking about the rest of you who are on this webinar, because in fact, we've been talking as if frontline workers are other people. But in fact, almost everybody who's on this webinar fits into one of these two categories. They are either doing something as a frontline worker from a medical perspective, or an essential worker, or they are a ministry leader. And they themselves, you know, you all are experiencing these same things. So it's not like we're just coming here to learn how to help other people. We're actually needing to maybe take a moment to acknowledge our own impact. So maybe we can go forward with that for something for you all. So what I'd like to do here is actually have you guys think about, everyone here, how has the work that you are doing during the pandemic had an impact on you? How is it even changing your sense of yourself, your sense of the world, maybe even your experience of faith? You might not be having lots of doubts, maybe you are, but maybe it's even your experience of your relationship with God, your relationship with your faith community, right? Your church, your colleagues, and of course, how is it affecting your relationship to your work? If you are caring for other people, if you are a shepherd, to use a biblical term, and caring for the sheep, it has affected you in a way, and you are taking in other people's stories. And you cannot take in all the pain of the world and not have it affect you, right? We see this even in the person of Jesus, as he is carrying the burdens of Jerusalem. He cries out to God, "Oh, Jerusalem, just how I would love to be able to, but I can't, you won't let me," right? You see the agony. So take a moment and consider, how is this work having an impact on you? What I'd actually like you to do is to use the chat, and I have a question for you to look at, and I want you to be thinking about this. We'll be bearing witness to each other. So if we can look at that next slide, we will be able to bear witness with others. I'd like you to write down, you can do it privately or you can do it in the chat, some of the signs of the residue of trauma that you're aware of in your current life. This is like secondary trauma or even your own traumas of things that are coming in from the distress going on in this time. And if you'll flip to the next slide, you will see that there is lots of different kinds of contagions that we can take on in our lives. Take a look at these. Fatigue, hopelessness, helplessness, questions of your faith, fear in relationships, anger and irritability, sadness, grief, anxiety, cynicism, nightmares, intrusive thoughts, feeling disconnected from loved ones, isolated, desire to isolate, sort of blurring of boundaries of work and not work, right? Disorganization, sensitivity to violence and things that are going on, avoidance, a lack of motivation, a sense of powerlessness, on, things that can have impact on you, difficulties of your own health. If you're brave and willing to share, type in the chat some of the top, maybe the top 3 things that you're noticing as an impact. I'll tell you mine. For me, there is a desire to isolate, and there is a sense of cynicism, and I am noticing some irritability that shows up in other parts of my life when things aren't working as well. I can see that blurring of boundaries where I don't know anymore between what's work and not work, since everything is all in the same space. Take a moment and let's bear witness to each other.
A lot of comments are coming in. You're feeling exhaustion, need for space, numbness, emotional eating, from nightmares to sleeping too much, depression, reminders of past traumas, 9/11 and tsunami in Japan, frustrated, irritability. Yeah.
As Stacy said, we're in impossible situations. We know God is at work and He is faithful, but we can't always see it and experience it. And the work that is in front of us has an impact. So as you are seeing this, thank you for being willing to share and bear witness to each other and to the pains that we bear. Now, we're not left just with hopelessness and helplessness. There are small ways that we can begin the process of finding antidotes. But the next slide will give us some questions about the motivation for why we would take time for ourselves. As Pearl talked about, someone who realizes they need to take care of their family, but also of themselves. I'm just want to remind us that in the work that we're doing, when we can feel guilty and that we're not doing enough, we can just get into doing and forget about the fact that God made us to have Sabbaths, right? He is a Sabbath-oriented God. So where do we find our sustenance? Remember Psalm 1 and Jeremiah 17 that have this imagery of the tree planted by a river that even in times of drought and distress is still able to be connected to the sustenance that God provides. So where are you going to find it? That's our motivation, to stay connected to God, to accept the fact that we actually do have limits. If the God of the universe stops and rests after 6 days of work, might He also expect and want His people to rest, maybe even more frequently? And of course, we follow the model of Jesus, who in His short 3-year ministry took time away to pray, took time to eat, to celebrate, to engage in conversations, right? So what I'd like you to do as we look at this next slide, I want you to begin thinking about some of the antidotes. So in the chat, would you consider 1 or 2 antidotes that you could type in there that you know you need a little bit more of. If you think about the impact of trauma in your life and all the things that it brings, like chaos and distress and disorganization and isolation and loss of hope, what are some of the things that begin to counter that, that are available to you right now? Are there beauty? Where I'm coming to you from, we're in springtime, and so things are opening up and unfurling, and I can go outside and look at leaves that are that new green, that are so fresh, and that gives me a reminder that God is in fact still nourishing the earth. Human connection, worship, order. Are there ways you can put order when there's disorder in your life? Exploring God's creation with all of your senses. Can you begin to write in some things that you will do? And when you type it in, you are holding yourself accountable to an audience of many who are going to see and pray over that with you to say, yes, I see that. I will encourage you to continue doing that. What do you think?
Lots of comments, singing, exploring creation, thinking positive things for the future, worship, watching faith-oriented movies, yard work, beauty, going for walks, writing, watching comedies. I do that a lot. I just need to watch something funny to not think about everything. Yeah.
Right. You know, the scriptures are full of reminders of what God had done in the past so that we could see what he is doing in the future, even if we can't always see right now how it's going to play out, right? And so that can be part of the antidote, remembering, recalling what God has done in your life. Do you remember that first calling he gave to you? Do you remember how he moved when you needed him to move? And even this is what we do in our laments, right? In Psalm 13 that you all know very well. We recall actually God's faithfulness in the past as we look forward to his help right now. What other things are you seeing there, Marlena, that people are saying?
Bible studies, not feeling guilty about cutting back things, and journaling, family level Bible study. So being more intentional with their Bible studies at home, practicing gratitude and gratefulness, checking in on others. So checking in on a strong friend that is usually the caring one, but checking in on them. Someone says quilting, and also enjoying silence as a gift. Hi, Lydia. I see that you said enjoying silence as a gift.
Yes.
Yeah, lots of great ideas. And like Phil said, you are holding yourself accountable to do these things, and hopefully getting some good ideas from others. Oh, cooking great meals with family, Zoom. It's funny, I didn't see a ton of people saying Zoom. I think we're all tired of Zoom a little bit, but thank you guys who are joining us from Zoom.
Yeah, playing games, right?
Mm-hmm.
Finding little bits of joy and life. So I'm going to actually ask you to go one step further from this, which is you wrote them down in the chat. Now write them to someone who knows you and loves you and will ask you, tell me, this week, today, what antidote did you try? Right? To remember that your life is not only work and ministry. So thank you, Marlena, for guiding us on this time, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Phil. And I really hope that this time was not just informative about how you can help and serve those that are in these frontline categories, but also ways that you can begin to respond to your own needs. You are also hurting in this pandemic. You are also feeling alone and afraid and unsure and helpless. But there are some, like Phil talked about, some antidotes to those things, like you've all just mentioned here. And if you can't think of anything, just scroll through and get some ideas that might be helpful for you. So I don't want you to drop off yet. We have about 5 minutes left, and I want to provide you with some action items on what you can do from now. We want to remind you to take the post-webinar survey. You'll get that once you X out of this. And we also want to remind you to access the resources that are in our on the THI website, but also report your activity. We want to hear these beautiful stories and testimonies of healing activity that's happening all around the world. And the way that we can receive that and hear those is through our database. So if you don't have access to our database, you can always email us at info@traumahealinginstitute.org. But a lot of you are asking, how can I access these materials? Again, the website is listed there and also in the chat. The next thing you can do is follow us on our social media channels. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And also YouTube is the place where you want to go to find all of our previous webinar recordings and where this webinar will be recorded moving forward. So again, thank you so much for joining us. We're so grateful for you. Again, we just want to remind you that you are not alone. We know that you're all carrying your own burdens and weights for yourself, and also considering how to care for those in your communities. God sees you, He knows you, and I just want to pray for you. Actually, I want to read Psalm 1 over you, and then I'll pray. It says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way that sinners take, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord, and who meditates on His law day and night." And this is my prayer for you, that you would be like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither, and whatever that you do would prosper. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for those that joined us today. You see each and every one. You hold them in your hand. You know their cares, their struggles, their concerns. But God, you also know that thing that will lift their head and point to you, whether that be looking for beauty or gardening, singing, worshiping, reading the word, just communing with you in silence, Father. You know the ways that we were designed to see you. And Father, I pray that this webinar would have been found to be helpful, practical tools on how to find hope in the midst of this pandemic, in this situation. Father, I pray that you would be with each and every one. We thank you that you don't leave us and you don't forget about us. We love you, Jesus, and we pray blessings over all of us. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us.